Hey everyone, this is Joel at Hamina Wireless. Welcome to Wi-Fi 101 Part 2. If you are joining us just after watching Part 1, welcome back. If you haven't seen Part 1 yet, I recommend it. It's probably going to be a good place for you to start. So let's jump in and talk about what we're going to talk about today. We'll begin by talking about BSSIDs, SSIDs, and ESSIDs, what they all do basically in the world of Wi-Fi. Then we'll talk about signal strength and signal to noise ratio, and we'll talk about how signal to noise ratios impact data rates. Then we're going to dip our toes into the world of 802.11 packet analysis or frame analysis by looking at the 802.11 frame types, and then we'll talk about how devices arbitrate for airtime, how they decide which device is going to talk next. Then we'll talk about how roaming works. We'll have a little primer on security and wrap things up. So with that, let's jump right in. So there's sort of three different ways that an access point is identified both to users and to wireless network devices. The first and the most basic one is a BSSID or basic service set identifier. This is basically the MAC address of an access point radio. Now, if you aren't familiar with what a MAC address is, basically every piece of network equipment out there ever has a unique MAC address. I think it stands for Media Access Control. I think that's what it stands for. Double check me on that. But every device out there has a unique MAC address. In fact, like if you look at my iPhone, the Wi-Fi adapter has a unique MAC address. I think the cellular radio has a unique MAC address. The Bluetooth adapter has a unique MAC address. The Bluetooth adapter on my smartwatch has a unique MAC address. Every networking device out there has one. So for it's going to be a hexadecimal value, for example, D420B0A2EFB7. Now, if your access point has multiple radios on board, which in 2025 it almost surely does, then each radio is going to have a unique MAC address as well. For example, the first radio might end in B7, and the second radio might end in B8. If it is a tri-band radio, then it'd probably have another one that it'll increment to something else, like maybe C0, might be the next one that the access point increments over to. Let me show you really quick. Let's take a look at an access point. Here's an oldie but a goodie. This is an Aerohive AP120. This is probably, when was this made? I'm going to guess 2007, 2008. Probably. Well, it's 802.11n, but it could be 802.11n draft, so it could have been made before then. But anyway, this has two radios on board. At least I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure that did. Yeah, it supports 802.11a, b, g, and N. I'll stick a picture of the label so you can see what that looks like. The 2.4 gigahertz radio has a MAC address, and the 5 gigahertz radio has a MAC address. Now, when a client device goes to associate to an access point, it's not going to look and see, oh, there's an access point with a 2.4 and a 5 gigahertz radio. I'll pick one of those and connect them. No, that's not what it looks like at all. Instead, the client device will see, hey, there's an access point in 2.4 gigahertz, and hey, there's an access point in the 5 gigahertz band. It basically sees that there are two APs out there, even if both radios happen to live inside the same box. But each radio on the access point is going to get its own MAC address and thus its own BSSID or basic service set identifier. All right, so now with the 120 put back on the shelf, let me show you very quickly. Let's just go take a look and see which BSSID my MacBook is connected to right now. So here is the hardware address of my MacBook Air. Here is the virtual address that it's using right now. Most modern devices will sort of make up a MAC address so that you can't be tracked from network to network. It's a privacy thing. And then here, the BSSID, that is the MAC address of the radio that I am connected to right now. So 7090412355D ending in 83. So if you hold down the Option key and click on the Wi-Fi logo, it'll give you this little expansion so that you can see things like which BSSID you are associated to. Cool. So let's jump back into the slides, talk about the SSID. So the SSID is the service set identifier. This is probably the one that you're already familiar with. This is a friendly name for the network. For example, it might be Aperture Science. So if you open up the Wi-Fi menu on your phone and you're looking for a network to connect to, you can see all the names of the networks because of the SSID. Now, an ESSID or Extended Service Set Identifier is basically multiple access points with the same SSID. So all three of these access points that have the SSID of Aperture Science compose or make up an extended service set identifier. So just to kind of recap between all three of them, the basic service set identifier is the MAC address of the access point radio, the SSID is the friendly network name, and the extended service set identifier is multiple access points that have the same SSID. The next thing that I want to talk about is transmit power. This one confused me for a long time, and I was really grateful when someone explained it to me, so I'm going to explain it to you, and I hope it helps you out. The first thing to know about signal strength in Wi-Fi is that it's really, really low. We're talking about very, very small numbers because the transmit power of Wi-Fi is so incredibly low, and the receive sensitivity of Wi-Fi adapters is so good that the numbers are just very, very small. And because of that, when we're looking at transmit power, it is represented as negative. So for example, negative 30 dBm is a much higher signal strength than negative 90 dBm. Additionally, Wi-Fi, both transmit power and receive power, like if we're measuring how much power we're receiving or what our signal strength is represented with basically two different measurements. We can represent it as dBm or decibels in relation to a milliwatt, or just as a milliwatt. Now, there's also the ability to reference it in dB, but this one we use it to represent changes in transmit power. So, for example, you might say, oh yeah, we went up 3 dB, or we saw 5 dB less of receive signal strength, or something like that. dB represents changes in signal strength. Both milliwatts and dBm represent absolute measurements of power. So let's take a look at what dBm means. You may have noticed that, the numbers, of course, like we said, are all in negatives, like minus 67, negative 50 dBm, negative 75 dBm. But one thing to be aware of with dBm is that it is not a linear scale. It is a logarithmic scale, which means that we can use small numbers to represent big changes in transmit power. So to make this a little bit easier, we use the rule of threes and tens. If we go up 3 dB, that means that we have doubled our signal strength. So let's say that we're sitting at negative 70 dBm, and then we see that the receive signal strength goes up to negative 67 dBm. We just went up 3 dB. We just had 3 dB of gain. If you go up 3 dB, that is doubling your signal strength. Let's go the other way now. If we look at minus 3 dB, that is half the signal strength. So let's say that we're sitting at negative 70 dBm and we go down 3 dB. We have 3 dB of loss, and now we're sitting at negative 73. That is half the signal strength. If we go down to negative 76 dBm, that's half the signal strength yet again. Negative 79, we just cut our signal strength in half again. That's called the rule of threes. And then there's the rule of tens. If we go up 10 dB, that means that we have 10 times the signal strength. And at the same time, if we go down 10 dB, that means that we have 10x less signal strength. So the rule of threes and tens isn't exact, but it's a really nice way to kind of visualize or more quickly understand how much the signal strength is changing. So after talking about how dBm when compared to milliwatts is a logarithmic scale instead of a linear scale, you might be wondering, why don't we use the linear one? Why do we have to remember the rule of threes and tens and put ourselves through this nightmare of numbers? Why not just use milliwatts? Great question. The problem is, like I mentioned earlier, the transmit power of Wi-Fi is very, very low. The receive sensitivity is very, very high, which means we can work with very, very small levels of power. For example, minus 60 dBm equals 0.000001 milliwatts. And minus 70 dBm stands for 0.000001 milliwatts. It's very, very small amounts of power. And this can be really, really annoying to convey in human conversation. Let's say that you're working with another wireless network engineer remotely. You're on the phone with them, and you're like, hey, what's the signal strength in that room look like? And they might say, it's kind of borderline. We have 0.000001 milliwatts in this room. And you go, okay, well, how's the next room over? The room where the users are having problems. Oh, yeah, it's not very good in here. We have 0.00000001. Nobody wants to do that. At the end of the day, saying minus 60 dBm or saying negative 70 dBm is much, much simpler when we're representing receive signal strength for Wi-Fi. It's just much easier to use dBm, even if it's a logarithmic scale instead of a linear scale. So the next question you might have is, well, what's a good signal strength anyway? I'm just going to give you some of my opinions here. These are just Joel's opinions, but I see good signal strength sort of like this. Negative 30 dBm is basically as good as it gets. Like you're sitting underneath the access point right now. Negative 65 dBm is what I consider to be a good minimum amount of signal strength for maybe voice over IP, maybe for most mobile devices and things like that, that maybe the antennas aren't, quite as good on the mobile devices, that sort of thing. I see lots of networks these days being designed for negative 65 dBm of coverage. Then negative 67 is, I made a mistake in the slide. I put streaming video twice. I'm going to get rid of it from here. Negative 67 is what I would say is the minimum for streaming video. Whether it's YouTube or things like that, that's probably the minimum that's going to work well. Negative 75 is what I would call the minimum for messaging applications. Think using iMessage or Telegram or sending emails or something like that. You probably want to have negative 75 dBm or better. At negative 80 dBm, things are going to start to get sort of unreliable, and your client devices are going to typically, they're going to start getting frustrated with the access point. They'll have so many retries. The retry rate will be so high. They'll finally just disassociate and start looking for another access point to connect to, or just disconnect altogether because they just can't maintain a reliable connection. At negative 90 dBm, that is when you are approaching or drowning in the noise floor. Now, if I stop talking for just a second, you probably hear some background noise in the room that you're in right now. Do you hear that? There's definitely a little bit in here. I can hear the hum of the air conditioner, machinery in the building, whatever it is. Every room has background noise. In a restaurant, there's a lot of background noise, right? If you're talking with somebody at your table, and maybe the signal strength of their voice is here and the background noise is here, and so you're kind of straining to understand them, right? Whereas in a quiet room like this, there really isn't hardly any noise, and so we have lots of signal above the background noise. Both in the audio world and in the radio spectrum world, there's always a noise floor, there's always background noise, and at negative 90 dBm, you're barely above that background noise. Cool. So let's kind of extend that a little bit and talk about the signal to noise ratio. So we talked about what a good signal strength is. And it's funny, like this is sort of the measurement that we always use for Wi-Fi, but it's actually not quite as applicable, not quite as useful as signal to noise ratio. Signal to noise ratio is how much signal is there above the background noise. So if the background noise is down here at negative 85 dBm, and maybe our signal is up here at negative 60 dBm, that means that we have about 25 dB of SNR. And most networks out there that you see designed today are shooting for 20 to 25 dB of signal to noise ratio, 20 to 25 dB of signal above the background noise. Although, if let's say that your signal's all the way down at maybe minus 75 or something like that, and you only have about 10 dB of signal to noise ratio, things are still going to work. Packet delivery is just not going to be as reliable, and it may or may not work for whatever application, whatever network application you are trying to use. So now the next thing I want to talk about that kind of ties in with the signal to noise ratio are data rates. So as the signal to noise ratio gets worse and worse and worse, maybe our signal strength comes down, maybe the background noise comes up due to machinery or noise from other devices or something like that. One thing that Wi-Fi devices will do is they'll start to experience retries. They'll have to retransmit the same data again. They'll have to retransmit the same data again. See what I did there? It was a retransmit, a Wi-Fi joke. But as we experience more and more retries, devices will start to move down to lower data rates. If they're hanging out at maybe, let's say 65 megabits per second. I'll draw a little circle right here on our our list of data rates. So if they're hanging out down here, up here at negative 65 dBm, but then the client device starts to move away from the access point, and now that fast data rate doesn't work reliably anymore. There's not as much signal strength, there's not as much signal to noise ratio, so that fast modulation scheme just isn't working as well as it used to, and there's more retries that are happening. The device will start to move down to a lower and lower and lower data rate until it finds a data rate that is consistent. Then it'll start to, over time, it'll start to like try faster data rates. It'll be like, well, what about 39 megabits per second? Okay, we got an acknowledgement on that. Well, what about 52 megabits per second? Oh yeah, we got an acknowledgement on that. So devices will dynamically move down and move up in data rate based on how many of the frames that they have transmitted end up being retries or not. Now keep in mind, an access point and a client device aren't negotiating a data rate. It's purely a client device will sit there internally measuring how many retries it's had, and maybe it's also looking at signal strength. It has its own sort of algorithm it runs in there, and it will dynamically pick data rates to try to find something that works consistently. So in the world of 802.11b, the data rates that we had were 1, 2, 5.5, and 11 megabits per second. 802.11a and 802.11g, remember that's when we got that new swanky modulation scheme called OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. 802.11a and G supported data rates of 6, 9, 12, 18, 24, 36, and 54 megabits per second. I have no problem memorizing those, but then when we got to 802.11n, I didn't memorize the data rates anymore. This table shows us all of the modulation and coding schemes available. MCSs, modulation and coding schemes. These are all of the possible data rates that are available with 802.11n, 802.11ac, and 802.11ax. Now, all the ones that are in yellow here, those are all the 802.11n data rates. I know a few people that have memorized all of these. They can, off the top of your head, they can tell you all of the 802.11n data rates. And all the different factors that sort of contribute to different data rates are things like, is it 802.11n or AC or AX? That's a factor. How many spatial streams does the device support? What's the channel width? Notice that we have a column here for 20 megahertz wide channels and a column here for 40 megahertz wide channels for 802.11n. When we move up to 802.11ac, we got an 80 megahertz column and a 160 megahertz column. And then with 802.11ax, things just kind of went crazy and we got a whole new set of data rates. So it's based on how many spatial streams, which PHY types it supports, what the channel width is, what the guard interval is. We won't get into what a guard interval is today. Let's see, what else? Oh, and also the most important thing of all, the most important one is the modulation and coding scheme that is in use. Now, I don't have time in this video to get into exactly how these modulation and coding schemes work, but I think the thing for you to know about is as we go down the list here, as we go down and to the right, the modulation and coding schemes get more complicated. The thing I want you to know, to walk away from this video with, is that as we go down the list, these get faster, but they get harder for us to understand. And to support these faster, swankier modulation schemes like 1024 QAM or whatever, we need to have really, really good signal to noise ratio. Now, our job as wireless network engineers, we're trying to go this way as much as possible. We want to go down and to the right. We want to get the fastest data rates that we possibly can so that devices get on the air and get off the air more quickly, and so we can support more and more devices on the channel, so we can support faster applications and things like that. By the way, if you want to check out this chart, go to MCSindex.com. There we go. MCSindex.com. So yeah, here's that exact chart. You can explore it to your heart's content. I refer back to this chart fairly regularly. It's kind of like the spectrum chart that I showed you in the last video. It's just a nice, at your fingertips sort of resource. In fact, when I built the spectrum chart, the ease of access of the MCS index is what inspired me to make the spectrum chart just a little web app that you could just, bookmark and get to rapidly at any time. Cool. Let's jump back into the slides and move forward. Where are we going next? I guess we're going to jump back out of the slides now, and we're going to simulate the signal-to-noise ratio and the data rate in Hamina. So remember back in the last video, we had this project, And I didn't really talk about it a whole lot, but we, for a moment, let's look in the 5 gigahertz band. We simulated coverage in the 5 gigahertz band. So right now we're looking at Wi-Fi coverage. You can see that as I hover my mouse here, you can see there's a little mouse over inspector as it shows you whatever the signal strength is underneath my mouse pointer. So right under the AP, we're looking at minus 40 dBm. By the time I get out here into the middle of this courtyard, we're looking at minus 64. Then we go past the green line. Now we're at minus 66, out to neg 70, all the way out to neg 77. And down to like, neg 95 or so. We're basically down in the noise floor at that point. So right now, we're looking at a simulation of receive signal strength. What's my receive signal strength right now? I'm going to hold down Option. Minus 43 dBm. Yeah, my access point is right there. So yeah, minus 43 looks about right. But if I were to take my laptop and pick it up and just basically touch the access point with it, we would see it hit about minus 30 dBm. So we would see 10 times the signal strength between here on the desk and holding it up, up there on this 8-foot or 2.5 meter ceiling. So you'd see a big swing in signal strength there. But let's switch over and look at the signal to noise ratio. So I'll just click on this one access point again. So you can see here, we've got 56 dB of SNR. As we move away, 27, 26, 25. So you see that the green line shows the edge of 25 dB of SNR. And then we get down, we go through a wall here, and we drop to 19 or so. And then we go to the other side of this wall, and now we're down at like 13 dB of SNR. So as we move away from the access point, and the signal from the access point gets more and more into the noise floor, we start to see worse and worse and worse, a lower SNR. Now I want to transition and talk a little bit about the different types of frames that there are in the world of Wi-Fi. Sometimes you're going to hear people call these packets. So you might hear the word packet. In fact, I use the term packet all the time, although I think the reality is that when you look at the OSI model and how things stack up, an 802.11 frame typically will basically always contain a packet from a higher level protocol source, but it's okay. Call them frames, call them packets. I don't really care. I tend to use the terms interchangeably, but there's 3 different types of 802.11 frames out there. The first is a management frame. A management frame manages stations joining and leaving wireless networks. It helps Wi-Fi devices join networks and leave networks. And the most common type of frame out there is a beacon. A beacon is simply an access point announcing that it exists. About 10 times a second or so, an access point radio will transmit a beacon to say, hey, I'm Aperture Science. I'm here. I support these data rates. I support this type of encryption. You can connect to me. And then a tenth of a second later, hey, I'm Aperture Science. I'm this type of network. I support this type of encryption. I support these data rates. You can connect to me. And an access point will advertise itself over and over and over again using beacon frames. Now, when you look at a list of access points on your computer, like let's click on mine and see all the different ones that I have here, I can see all of these. I can see all these SSIDs because of beacons. The beacons contain the MAC address, that's the BSSID. They contain the SSID and a bunch of information about what that access point radio does and does not support. All right, so then next, the next type of management frame is a probe request. A probe request happens when a Wi-Fi client searches for a network. It might say, hey, Aperture Science, are you there? Hey, Hamina, are you there? And then what will happen is if an access point with the name Hamina receives that probe request, it will reply with a probe response and say, hey, I'm Hamina. I'm here. I support these data rates. I support this type of encryption. You can connect to me. And it's very, very similar to a beacon. Probe responses and beacons are very, very similar in construction. They contain basically the same data. Then we have an authentication request and an authentication response. This is used to, not surprising anyone, authenticate to a wireless network. The funny thing about authentication requests and authentication responses is we use them in a really old type of encryption, authentication and encryption. We don't actually really use them anymore. They're there for backwards compatibility's sake, but they don't really do anything in the modern protocol. So we'll talk about that. Maybe I'll get into that when we start to talk about the security side of stuff. Then we have an association request, an association response. This is where a client might say, hey, here are my capabilities. Can I associate to you? And then the access point will reply with an association response saying, either a yes or a no, whether the device is allowed to connect to it, associate to it or not. So management frames help stations join and leave wireless networks. Next are control frames. Control frames control the RF medium, the radio frequency medium. They basically control the channel and ensure that other types of frames get delivered. They make sure that other types of frames get delivered. One example of this is an acknowledgement. So you remember earlier we were talking about a client and an access point sending data, receiving acknowledgement, data, act, data, act. That's the type of frame that this is. This is a control frame, and it's very, very common. The next is a block acknowledgement. So when you're moving a lot of data in one direction, like maybe streaming video down to a client, it's a little inefficient to go data, acknowledgement, all the time. With a block acknowledgement, we can now acknowledge a block of data frames at the same time. We can go data, acknowledgement, data, acknowledgement. You can acknowledge a whole bunch of data frames at the same time. The risk there's a little bit of a risk reward thing here in that if one of those data frames in that block doesn't make it through, we have to throw it all away and transmit it all again. But if the SNR is good and we're using a nice fast data rate, then that's probably going to be just fine. Now there's another type called RTS, CTS, that's request to send and clear to send. When Wi-Fi devices are arbitrating for airtime, deciding who gets to talk next, there can arise situations where you might have two devices that are on the same channel, but they can't hear each other. We have an access point here, we have a wall, we have a client, we have another client, and if these two are talking, or maybe this device is, transmitting up to this access point, this device down here is a hidden node. I have no idea that device is there. It doesn't know that I'm here. We can't hear each other. We might accidentally interrupt each other. In this case, if this happens a lot, then we will start using RTS, CTS, or request to send and clear to send within the conversation. Hey, can I send something? Yes, you can say something. And what that does is it tells everybody else on the channel, hey, everybody shut up. Somebody is about to talk. Finally, we have data frames. These are the whole reason that we have a wireless network. These carry the higher level protocol data, the actual network traffic like our UDP frames and our TCP frames, and they're kind of subdivided into three categories. We have normal plain old data frames. Then we have quality of service data frames. These are just data frames that we've attached a priority to, like, hey, this is a voice frame. Get it there first. It's really important. And then we have null data frames, which are used for things like power save polls and stuff like that. It's like we had another frame type and they didn't really fit into control frames. They didn't really fit into management frames. And so we sort of shoehorned them into data frames. They're not really data frames, but they kind of live there anyway. So what I want to do now is let's talk about how devices decide who gets to talk next. And notice that we've got all of our different frame types colored the same ways here. This is actually something that MetaGeek came up with way back in the day. They did purple for management frames, orange for control frames, and blue for data frames. And I think this has kind of persisted all the way to today. Some 15 years later, this is still sort of the standard colors for some of the packet analysis tools and things that are out there. And I've used the same color schemes here. So what we've got a bunch of stations that are all on the same channel. Now, in this case, a station can be an access point or a client. Doesn't really matter. They're just a Wi-Fi station of some kind. And we've got time moving from left to right. So let's kind of walk through this and see how client devices decide, how access points too, decide who gets to talk next. So here at the beginning, station 6 is just finishing up sending some data. And then there's a SIFS, which is a short interframe space. It's sort of that little gap between when you stop talking and somebody else will reply with something. That's a SIFS, a short interframe space. And then station 5 is going to reply with an acknowledgement. And at that point, their conversation is done. They have now concluded their conversation. Meanwhile, station 3, 4, 1, and 2, they all had a timer running called a nav timer. We'll talk about that in just a second. They all have a timer running, and that timer runs out, and now they know that there's a little space, there's a little opportunity to talk. So now they see a diffs. I think that stands for distributed interframe spacing. I don't remember off the top of my head, but here's the important thing to know about a diffs. A diffs is a signal to everything on the channel. Hey, there's an opportunity to talk. Everybody get ready. You might have an opportunity to talk. So once everyone that has something to say hears the diffs, they're going to roll the dice in their head. They're going to roll the dice and look at their dice and just remember what number they rolled. So station 2 rolls a 7. And station 4 rolls a 9. Now, after the diffs, the distributed interframe space, I hope that's what that is. After the diffs ends, they start counting in their heads in unison. Station 2 goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if it counts all the way up to 7 and nothing else has started talking, it goes, cool. It's my turn to talk. So now it's going to transmit a request to send. Now, when that happens, remember that station 4 was also counting in its head. It was counting up to 9. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, something started talking before it got up to 9. So station 2 transmits its request to send. Everybody else on the channel hears that. They all now back off, and then they also all set a timer, a nav timer. So they all receive the request to send, and they all set a nav timer, a network allocation vector timer. Basically, they say, oh, okay, in the RTS, the station 2 said it needs this many milliseconds, so I'm just going to shut up and be quiet until that time is over. So they all back off. Now, notice what happened here, though, with station 4. Station 4 rolled a 9. It counted up to 7. It had 2 slots remaining. It holds on to those 2 slots. So now it says, okay, I just need to wait 2 more slots before I get to talk again. So now station 2, remember it sent its RTS. Station 1 replies with the clear to send. Station 2 transmits its data. Station 1 replies with the acknowledgement, and our nav timers run out, and there is now another diffs that tells everyone, hey, there's another opportunity to talk. So now Station 2 has more to say. It's got more stuff that it needs to transmit, so it rolls a new number, and this time it rolls a 10. And so it starts counting. 1, 2, 3. Oh, and what happened? Meanwhile, Station 4 had 2 slots remaining. So it went 1, 2, my turn to talk. And now it's not using RTS CTS, so it just transmits its data. It's like, my turn to talk, and starts transmitting its data. And that tells everything else on the channel to shut up and be quiet, as it has now reserved this amount of time with a nav timer. And then we have an acknowledgement, and some more things happen from there. This is happening. If you have a phone in your pocket right now, you're probably watching this on your laptop or an iPad or something like that, or smart TV. This is happening thousands of times a second on whatever device you're using right now, whatever device is in your pocket. Even when an access point wants to transmit a beacon and say, hey, I'm Aperture Science, I'm here, I support these data rates, that is a frame type, and the airtime has to be arbitrated just like this. Remember that on any given channel at any given time, one device can talk, and this is how they decide whether they can talk or not. The fact that Wi-Fi, that 802.11 works at all is truly incredible to me. It is amazing to me that the timing all works out, and that we're able to stream Netflix to 3 or 4 devices on the same channel at the same time, and they're constantly fighting and rolling the dice for airtime and deciding who gets to talk next. It's just amazing to me. And that's one of the reasons why I love Wi-Fi, why I love this industry so much, is that the technology is super, super cool. I just love this and how it all works. Cool. Before I jump out of the packet stuff, one thing I wanted to do is I'm going to do a packet capture really quickly just to show you that world. I'm going to do it with our survey device. This is the OmniNomad. The main use case for this is you plug it into an iPhone or an iPad and you walk around to make heat maps. It measures things by doing packet capture, basically. So I'm booting it up right now, and I'm going to plug it in to my laptop with a USB-C cable. So I'll plug it in, and let's jump out of the slides. And I'm going to use a tool called AirTool. So this is a third-party tool by our good friend Adrian at Intuitibits. This is a little utility that you can run on Mac OS, and I think there's a version for iPad OS and iOS now too, so check that out as well. But on Mac OS, the main point of this is that you can use it to perform packet captures with the built-in Wi-Fi adapter on your Mac. You don't need to buy our piece of hardware. You just need to go spend like the $10 or $20 or however much this costs. It's worth it. Whatever the price is, just pay it. It's a great little tool. But one thing that Intuitibits did for us is they added support for our survey device, so you can use it for packet capture as well. So we're still booting up right now. Let's give it just a second to finish booting. There we go. Done. So we'll click on OmniNomad here. And which channel am I on right now? I am on channel 21 in the 6 gigahertz band. So we're going to go to 6 gigahertz. We're going to choose channel 21. I'm going to do what's our channel width? Can I tell that from here? I don't remember. RSSI noise TX rate. 80 megahertz right there. So we'll do an 80 megahertz wide capture and hit start. And now we're capturing any of the 802.11 frames that are flying across that channel right now. So I've captured about 500 or 600 here. It's only about 200 kilobytes or so. I'm not really moving a significant amount of data. So now we'll hit stop. And that's going to open up in Wireshark. So Wireshark is a free and open source packet analysis tool. And one thing that I have done is I have applied a custom coloring profile to this that I lovingly called Potato Frames. This is a fork of the MetaGeek coloring profile. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Potato Frames GitHub. I'm typing in an angle here. Here we go. So here it is. Again, a fork of the MetaGeek Wireshark profile. But if you want to grab this profile and turn your Wireshark from this to this, you can go to my GitHub and grab that coloring profile for free. But yeah, here's all the different frames. So you can see here's a bunch of beacons. So there's Hamina Guest, the Hamina Meraki Lab is on the same channel. And you can see the beacons continuously happening. You can see an RTS, CTS, and then a quality of service data frame happening right there. So here's our transmitter MAC address. Here's our receiver MAC address or BSSID. And then we send a clear to send, and then we have, once again, we have our transmitter and our receivers. You can see a complete little conversation happening right there. Again, purple being our management frames, orange being our control frames, and blue being the actual upper level protocol data. Notice how little protocol data is going across the air right now. It's mostly management overhead that's happening at the moment. But I just want to give you a quick taste of that so you can kind of see what the world of packet analysis looks like. Cool. All right, so last thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about roaming. When and how client devices decide when to roam. And that, I think, is the most important thing to understand about roaming. The client decides when to roam. And every client has a different way of deciding when they will perform a roam. Client devices decide, I forgot a word here. Client devices decide when to roam and how to roam. Basically, which access point radio am I going to roam to? We call this decision-making process the green diamond. It kind of references a flow chart where, you get to a diamond in a flow chart and that represents a decision. So the green diamond represents the internal decision matrix in a client device that drives it to decide when to roam and where to roam to. Now, the concept of the green diamond is totally made up by our friend Keith Parsons at Wireless LAN Professionals. Keith came up with this concept years ago and has been teaching it in classes for years. So it's become a pretty common analogy in the world of Wi-Fi. So there are a lot of different things that will influence a client's decision to roam. Things that might influence its decision are what is the signal strength of nearby access points. Occasionally, a client device will go off channel from where it's talking with its current associated access point. It'll go off channel, look for other access points, Now it has a list of potential candidates that it might roam to. And if the situation gets bad enough with the current access point, it might decide to roam to one of those other access point radios. Things that will influence its decision when to roam are signal strength, signal to noise ratio. I think probably one of the biggest ones is the retry rate. If the retries are just going through the roof, if the client device has gone all the way to the lowest data rate it possibly can, and it still isn't managing to bring those retries back up, then it will make the decision to roam to another access point. And then it has to decide which access point to associate to. It's probably, almost all the time it's going to prefer within its own ESSID, right? It's going to try to roam to an access point with the same SSID or service set identifier. It's going to try to stay in network almost all of the time. But it's going to look and see, well, how wide of a channel width, like if this one's offering me a 40 megahertz wide channel and this one's offering me a 160 megahertz wide channel, that's a more attractive access point. So it might prefer to roam to an access point that's offering a wider channel. Which PHY types does it support? This one's an 802.11n access point, but this is an 802.11ax access point. That's a pretty easy decision, right? But remember, every client handles these things differently. You might take an iPhone, you might take a Windows laptop, you might take a Chromebook. They all are going to make completely different decisions for when they decide to roam and how they pick a new access point to associate to. So let's talk about how client devices actually associate to a new access point. So let's say that we've got a client and it's decided that it's time to roam. It's going to try to find a new access point to associate to. Maybe the first thing it's going to do is it's going to transmit some probe requests. It's going to go across a bunch of different channels and it's going to send a probe request on a channel and listen for any probe responses from any access points on that channel. Then it'll go to the next channel and do it again. Send a probe request. Hey, Aperture Science, are you there? And then listen for any probe responses from any access points that are part of that network. So once it's gone through all the channels that it cares about, it's received all the different probe responses. Now it will perform that green diamond operation and it will pick an access point and transmit an authentication request to that access point. Now the authentication request back in the WEP or wired equivalent privacy days, this is where the authentication actually happened. This is where it would give it its credentials and then the access point would reply with an authentication response and say whether you're authorized or you're not authorized. These days, we have now moved that process down below and behind the association process. That now happens in the four-way handshake with relatively modern authentication protocols like WPA and WPA2 and WPA3. That all now happens in the four-way handshake. So it's kind of funny. The authentication response and authentication request and authentication response is a holdover from the WEP days. And so now we still transmit the authentication request and authentication response, but we do it as if it was an open, unencrypted network, and then we actually set up the encryption later on. It's just a funny holdover from how things were way back in 1997 up until about, I want to say 2000, 2001, something like that, when WPA came on the scene. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we do our authentication request. Yep, you're good. Authentication response, all good there. Then we do our association response. Hey, can I associate to you? Here are my capabilities. And then the access point will reply with an association response, basically saying, yes, you can associate, or no, you don't support the right things, so you can't associate with me. Then we do the four-way handshake. So this is where we exchange some keys back and forth to authenticate and set up encryption and do all those things. And now we're now associated to this network and we can start passing traffic back and forth. As you can see, when a client roams to another access point, there are several steps that have to happen. We have to go look for an AP. You have to go off channel to go look for access points, hear responses from access points, do an authentication request, authentication response, association request, association response. Then we have to do the four-way handshake 1, 2, 3, 4 to set up encryption. It takes some time. So if you ever hear a vendor use a term like seamless roaming, I mean, we can get roams done pretty fast, and there's some good mechanisms out there to help with this. but they're never seamless. They're never quite fast enough for me to call them seamless. All right, let's wrap up by talking about different forms of security. So there are basically 5 different types of security out there. I'm going to bucketize them in 5 different ways. And there's a lot of ways you could subdivide these further, but this is like a good way to just sort of visualize all of them together. First off is our good old friend, open. No security at all. So it's open authentication, so you don't have to have a key or anything like that to get authenticated to this network. The bummer with it is that there's no encryption. So you don't have any built-in security at all. What you are relying on is upper layer protocols like HTTPS for security. So you're using, TLS, for example, to secure stuff. If you're doing connection over SSH, it is secured in and of itself, but the Wi-Fi around that data that you're transmitting in itself is not secured. Back in the day, when WEP was cracked and they had this huge crisis, the IEEE and the Wi-Fi Alliance made a plan. They implemented a stopgap measure called WPA, or Wi-Fi Protected Access. So a stopgap measure until WPA2 could be rolled out because it was compatible with the old hardware. So we could have a new form of encryption that was compatible with the old hardware as a stopgap. It is limited to 54 megabits per second. The IEEE and the Wi-Fi Alliance really, really, really want you to move on and use WPA2. There's 2 flavors of WPA. There's WPA Personal, sometimes called WPA PSK, which stands for passkey. It uses an 8 to 63 character passphrase. Then there's WPA Enterprise. With WPA Enterprise, you typically will have an authentication server sitting on your network somewhere. So when you connect to the network, you'll supply a username and password or a certificate or something like that. That gets passed through the access point to a Radius server. The Radius server gives you a thumbs up or a thumbs down and then goes back to the access point, and access point will then say, yeah, sorry, no, you don't have the right credentials, or yeah, you have the right credentials, come on in, and then we'll establish encryption, all that stuff. Okay, so then the non-stopgap version was WPA2, or Wi-Fi Protected Access 2. This used a new cipher suite, and it required new hardware. So this one took new hardware, but we still had WPA2 Personal / WPA2 PSK and WPA2 Enterprise, just like we had with WPA. WPA2 was solid for years and years and years and years. It didn't see any significant security vulnerabilities until just a handful of years ago. I'm not really super up on all the different vulnerabilities. The one that I remember was the Hashcat vulnerability. I don't remember the specifics of it, but if I remember correctly, to exploit the Hashcat vulnerability, you'd basically need to stuff some GPUs in a backpack connected to a laptop or something like that. Yes, there are some security vulnerabilities for WPA2, but they're pretty niche. They're not all-encompassing. To me, WPA2 is, I think, fairly strong for most use cases. Of course, the new one on the block is WPA3, Wi-Fi Protected Access 3. It's been around for a handful of years now, but we still don't have universal client support for it. We got Chromecasts at the office. We had a couple of guys here using Linux, and the Chromecast did not support WPA3. So I had to set up a WPA2 network for them to be able to associate to get them on the Wi-Fi. Pretty annoying, but then again, the Chromecast just hit end of life anyway. So I guess it's kind of understandable. WPA3 has 3 variants. The first is really exciting, is Enhanced Open. So with Enhanced Open, you can walk into a coffee shop and associate to their wireless network, their WPA3 Enhanced Open network, without providing any kind of credentials, no password or anything, but you still get encryption with this, which I love. I absolutely love Enhanced Open. Now, I know that I just got done telling you that, yeah, open SSID is not that big of a deal if you're being smart. Big if there. If you're being smart, not a big deal. WPA3 with Enhanced Open, with OWE, which stands for Opportunistic Wireless Encryption, solves that problem entirely. Any user can walk in, associate to the network, no username and password required, they still get encryption. Fantastic. Love it. And WPA3 also offers WPA3 Personal and WPA3 Enterprise, which pretty much work the same way as far as like a function perspective. Functionally, they work pretty much the same way as WPA and WPA2. WPA3, we could probably spend an hour on it. I don't know if you could tell. I hope you couldn't tell, but security is not my forte. It's not my strong point. So take all that I said about the security stuff here with a grain of salt. Be smart. Go read some security blogs and things like that. And also check out the CWSP, the Certified Wireless Security Professional. That's one of the certifications offered by CWNP that focuses on the security side of Wi-Fi. I highly recommend that. It is the study guide is a great read, and it's a great certification to have if you want to feel really confident about the security side of things for Wi-Fi. And on that bombshell, it's time to end. So you might be wondering what to do next. Like I mentioned earlier, the CWNP program, great place to start. In part 1, I mentioned the CWNA, or the Certified Wireless Network Administrator. Great certification for a good overview of Wi-Fi stuff. CWAP is the analysis professional. That one focuses on the packet analysis and the protocol side of things. CWSP is the security professional. That focuses on the security aspects of Wi-Fi. Those are 3 great certifications, and they offer a few more on top of that. If you want to learn more about Hamina stuff, then go hit up our website, check out our knowledge base, our YouTube channel. We have a lot more Hamina specific kind of stuff out there. The Hamina training that we offer, the Hamina Certified Network Architect I talked about in the last video. Again, great way to get an overview of how Wi-Fi works, sort of CWNA level stuff. And it also teaches you everything you need to know about how to design great wireless networks. Not so much how to use our tool, but how to do great network design. You'll learn how to use our tool on top of it. It's pretty easy to use. And then, of course, the Hamina Planning Specialist and the Hamina Survey Specialist if you want something a little bit lighter that's a little bit more focused on specific tasks. These are all taught by our good friend Peter McKenzie. Total pro when it comes to Wi-Fi design and especially protocol analysis. Like I said in the last video, he is the world premier guy for protocol analysis, for Wi-Fi analysis, for Wi-Fi, and he's a great guy to listen to. Very entertaining, very thoughtful. I appreciate Peter a lot, and we're thrilled to have him on board as our training partner. All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much for checking out this video series, Wi-Fi 101, Part 1 and Part 2. If you want to see more, put something down in the comments. We could do a Part 3 if you're interested. We could talk about how modulation works, for example. Thanks for being here. Hope to see you in a Hamina video really soon. Bye now.